Stephen to the rescue. Sorry, thank you, Stephen.
Yeah.
Sorry, so yeah, about us, some of you will know, will have been on some of these webinars before or lunch and learns. We're risk and compliance professionals and we have a software, the calQrisk solution to do the total governance and risk and compliance, but we also like to talk and effectively educate the market where we can if we're useful. There's a fair amount of experience in the organisation. I've been on boards of all sorts of charities, so not-for-profits, state company, and a couple of executive director roles across my career. So I know a little bit from experience of a number of different types. So hopefully in this presentation we'll share some of that. The first thing we're going to look at is fiduciary duties or fiduciary responsibilities, and then a little bit about behaviour and attitudes, but at individual level and the collective level, and then talk a little about gathering data. And the other thing about these do reviews of a board is how do you make the data you've gathered useful? I like this quotation I got from a fellow John McCarthy years ago. And it's simply to put forward or something in context. And forward means completely different things to Attila the Hun and a Trappist monk. And the issue with a board, particularly, depending on the board type a little bit, but certainly for a not-for-profit or where a lot of the boards are voluntary, like in a sporting organisation, you're likely to get a mix of people, a mix of attitudes, and a mix of beliefs around what the attitude of the individuals in the organisation and what they bring to the organisation. Now, some of this is not bad. A mix is always good, but it also needs to stay focused on the purpose. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So fiduciary is best defined as held or given in trust. So basically, that's a definition of the word, and all directors and trustees are fiduciaries. So basically, every director or trustee has this responsibility. They have to commit to act in the best interests of the principal or beneficiary. And in commercial business, that's the stakeholders at the end of the day, or in voluntary and not-for-profits, it is the purpose of the organisation. And the fiduciary commits to act in the best interest. And that's the most important piece about what they do. Best way to find out what the purpose is to ask the question, why does the organisation exist? In some cases, it can be to benefit shareholders, to make profits, to grow the business, to drive the top line and pay big dividends. In some cases, it will be to satisfy a need in the community. It can be effectively anything. But whatever it is, it needs to be known by those, the directors and trustees, in order to perform their duties. And what are the duties? Well, the fiduciary duties are defined here. This isn't an exclusive list, but there's a duty of care, there's a duty of loyalty, good faith, confidentiality, and a duty of prudence. The prudence one is that anything you do as a fiduciary or a director or trustee needs to be done prudently. You have to be cautious and always think about the best interest of the organisation in performing these duties. It's ethical, moral, there's all sorts of things bound in there in those duties, but sometimes they get either forgotten or in any evaluation, it's important to bring these things back to the fore again. Part of the why we're here, conversation, how do we serve the purpose for the organisation? How do we contribute to that purpose? one of the things that the fiduciary, well, all directors are responsible for is what we describe here as layers of responsibility. And the layers are obligations. So the first thing you're looking at is the law. There are things that you'll go to jail for if you don't do. So you're looking at Companies Acts or whatever, anything that's been effectively mandated by a government. You must. Things like you're almost tax compliant. There's things that you trigger mechanisms, and there are things that you have to do and serve in order to attest or comply with the requirements of the law. The second one, similar, less onerous at the moment because you don't go to jail for a failure of regulation or supervision, but there are regimes coming both in the UK and in Ireland, and these regimes begin to hold, certainly in certain sectors, I'm talking about banking in particular, they're looking at holding the individuals responsible. Now, that supervision, for example, a charities regulator is a supervisor. They have the power to inspect. They have the power to ask how well is the organisation being managed, and there's an obligation to be able to demonstrate that. Then you're dealing, the next layer is the codes and standards. So you may have an affiliation with a body, the Institute of Directors we cited here, in the ACCA, whatever your obligations under that, they need to be, generally they're not regulatory, but if you could be debarred, for example, you could lose your capacity if you fail to meet the requirements of those codes and standards. Again, something to bring to mind. And then finally, the thing that's often forgotten is the governing documents. So basically what you're looking at here is you have a rule book. Your organization has a rule book. And if you look at the word again, trust, the deed of trust, whatever it is, you have decided that this is how we work, and we work with these governing documents. So those four layers of organization are the kind of things that emanate from the fiduciary responsibilities, and they become, in part, the objectives of the organization. It's probably the compliance and governance part. It's the rules and regulations piece. It's the piece. It's the stuff or the piece of the organization that, nobody really wants to get involved with, but it has to be done. So I'm looking at here board structure, and just going to go through, you'll find yourself in this if you're a director or if you have an organization that has one of these boards or trustee organizations. So there are voluntary boards, there are professional boards where you've got some significant hired directors on the boards. They would be typically large corporate boards. But in some cases, the professional boards, sometimes you will find executive directors where the independent directors and the professional directors within the organization work together to serve the purpose of the organization. The other thing that you've got here is board committees. And one of the things that the committees cause to happen is to cause a relationship to form both internally with the board members, but also with the executive that they interface with. So those committees are useful for the communication to make the totality of the organization work better. People are people, and how they interact is varies, shall we say. Executive directors are just that, they are executive directors, so they're appointed by the organization, they're paid by the organization to do a certain job, and they also have a responsibility to sit on the board and look at the overall. Mandated members are it's a difficult one to be a mandated member. So for example, if you're representing a region, for example, or if you're representing a group of people, so employee directors, would be mandated, and they wind up with kind of internal conflict when they're talking about the greater good, the whole mission, but then they have to return to the group they represent and explain those decisions. So it's a tough spot. And if you do have mandated members, it's important to remember that they have a constituency, certainly when you're doing any evaluation. Independent directors and NEDs they're very good because they can and often bring different views to an organization. And sometimes you'll see when organizations get into trouble, you'll often find independent directors are appointed, sometimes by regulators. And the issue here is to get different and new views. But again, usually in the corporate world, rather than in the not-for-profit voluntary space. So why bother to evaluate performance? It's in some cases it's a mandatory requirement. So, for example, if you're looking at some of the codes of practice that are out there, there is a requirement that you do this. You go through this process, and it's also suggested best practice. So again, depends on the type of board, how it's made up. The key to its effectiveness are the behaviour and critically the attitudes of its constituent members. But to do the performance, to do that evaluation, it's important to understand what's driving it. Some of them are hard requirements, some of them will be softer. And the soft requirements are that human interaction. So it gives an opportunity to refocus on the purpose of the organization. And it's also, particularly in a conversation with a chair, which would be typically how this would be done at individual level, it's a safe place for board members to express concerns that they may not be comfortable with talking about in a wider group. And basically what it creates is a better personal connection between the chair and directors. And I suppose it's probably true to say most people would avoid the evaluation process if they could. But at the same time, when they think about it and they get involved in it, most people, having been through it, are happy that they did it. So don't be afraid of it. It's a conversation that you need to have. So from a director's perspective, I just put down the notion here of why bother? Why would I do this? And try to put some bullets together around what the benefits are. And enlightened self-interest was the headline I put in. And it basically then tried to put in some things about outcomes that perhaps the individual director would like to get if they thought about it. The probability is they wouldn't think about it until they were engaged in the process. But for example, it's important for me to have a review. I want confirmation of how I'm doing. And anybody who's dealing in a scenario where they are managing people, you'll find always that the people want a review. They want to know how they're doing. And if there's gaps, they want to hear about the gaps. And usually they will ask about how they can fix those. It gives you that opportunity, but it also gives you an opportunity to tell them when they're doing a good job. The other thing that happens in this process, as I said, it's very personal. It builds relationships. And it's an opportunity to reevaluate and reconfirm the commitment, both to the organization and perhaps to the chair. But it regenerates, to some extent, it regenerates the why you came to be in the position of offering your service as a director in the first place, and why with this organization. I find it particularly in not-for-profits that people are passionate about the mission. They're passionate about the why they're there, and it's that passion can be relit, if you like, in the review process. And so there are probably other advantages from a director's perspective that would emerge going through the process of an evaluation. And I'm not saying you're going to make it fun or it will become fun, but it is to some extent cathartic. That revisit of the commitment, the revisit of the purpose of why you're there is cathartic. Now, the individual assessment, and there are many ways to do board. There are many ways to do a board review, but a few key things. The individual should have the opportunity to reflect on their own performance, their contribution, attributes, their attitudes, the behaviour at meetings, generally as a responsible director, and that's probably in part that's the process. The balance between being strong, holding strong views, articulating them, and seeking support for a viewpoint or a direction change is part of what being a director should do if they believe passionately in something, but always within the context of the purpose and direction of the organization, always satisfying the why are we here question. And to some extent, the individual evaluation process can be an eye-opener. It can, to the individual on the review, depending again on how it's done, it tests behaviors and attitudes. And two questions that are posed in it is, do I sometimes? So if there's a set of rules and a set of norms, do you always obey them? Or is it occasional? So two questions, do I sometimes and do I always? And individual directors, if you're doing a checklist, for example, should be asked to consider that. And then they should be asked to reflect on the board performance, both themselves individually, the performance of their colleagues, and the performance of the total. Because at the end of the day, it's the total activity of the board. It's the interface with the executive, where there is an executive, if there's an executive associated with the organization, and in most organizations there will be some. So is that connection, that communication as a collective? And it also tests the relationship with the chair. Whoever the chair is, it's sort of the big junction, if you like, in this process between the board and the executive. Most of the communication will be done between the chief executive and the chairman. And if there are stakeholders out there, it tends to be the chairman of the board that is expected to answer the questions and have the answers. So that responsibility, depending again a little bit on the organization, that tends to sit with the chair. And often they'll deflect that to the CEO if they have confidence in the CEO. But yeah, the individual assessment should in part look to reflect on the total board performance. And this is really what we're looking at here. So having done the individual, I'll call it performance review, how is the board performance measured? So how do you know that the board serves its purpose, is doing what it sets out to do? And the first thing is ask the stakeholders. So the stakeholders in the business would be maybe the members, maybe the shareholders, the beneficiaries. It is something that is hard to do, but needs to be done. So ask the shareholders how we do it. Usually, if you look at the metrics, you'll have a fair idea. So, for example, if it's a commercial enterprise and they have shareholders, it'll be reflected in the share price, it'll be reflected in the sales performance, it'll be reflected, the metrics are there. And it's reasonable to say that the board is doing okay if those metrics are running well. It's not necessary that if the business metrics are looking okay, it may not be reflective of what's going on the board. But for the most part, it does. It's a good indicator. And the other question to ask is the board efficient? And again, the question, how can we tell? And the best way to do that is to ask the members, and particularly the executive that support the board. Sometimes boards demand stuff or are assumed to demand stuff from the executive that support them. And there's an expectation, and oftentimes there's a lot of work and effort put into presenting material, preparing material for the board. Sometimes the understanding that this material is required, and then it's brought into a boardroom, and there might be something else that's hot on the agenda, and all the effort may go to a very swift review and basically the diminution of the effort put into the preparation. So and asking the executive, is the board efficient? First of all, you'll probably find that if you're a director, it's a strange question. The executive will find it's a strange question to be asked to answer, and they'll answer it carefully for the most part. But it's a question worth asking when you're looking at a board collective review. Key to it, crossroads, is the chairman, and some of the things that the chairman should, chairperson, I need to be careful with that because there are some very effective ladies out there now chairing some very significant organizations. So yeah, the chairperson needs to have a set of key skills, and it's a strange mix. A couple of the things that make the chair, I wouldn't say important, the chair is very important, but make the chair that crossing. One is the communication with the executive, where there's an executive. The other thing is, with a chair, there should be a succession plan, and they need to have that in their head. So a good chair will be looking out to see, where's my replacement? They may not want it to happen immediately, but the replacement needs to have the same kind of passion for the organization and some of the skills that they would bring to it. So some of these are forced. So term limits on the chair is not unusual. For example, in golf clubs, the captain gets to be the captain for a year, and there's absolutely no doubt that he moves on very shortly afterwards. So the rotation issue, pick the time for that succession. And the other thing is, if you've got board committees, for example, rotate the membership of the board committees over time. It gives a broader experience of the organization. It gives more opportunity to talk with the executive. And the chair should cause that to happen. Not let a director lodge on the same committee for a very, very long time, unless obviously they have and bring a set of skills. The other thing a chair has to have is patience. Patience combined with diplomacy. They have to be the one that is most focused in the organization on the mission of the organization. That why we're here question should come and radiate most from the chairman. And then they need to be good communicators. And ideally, getting back to the point earlier on about the interaction with the executives, they need to be organized. And meetings need to be on time. Things that are said and done need to be done in an organized fashion where people sense that they're here and they're not wasting their own time being here. And that's usually the chairman. So, and to some extent, I suppose it's in the diplomacy, chairman needs to be conscious of the effort going on around them to cause the organization to succeed. And that's at both executive and at director and board level. So how to conduct assessments? The first thing to do is ask the questions. Now, there are obviously many ways to do this. And I wouldn't necessarily advocate a particular way to do it, but usually it starts with asking the questions. You can anonymize the inputs, but then having got the inputs, you need to assemble the data. Now, this probably done at chair level. So the one-on-ones, the questions will be done with the chair, not necessarily face-to-face. You can do it electronically from a distance, first gather the inputs and then assemble the data. You'll find common issues. So there are common things that somebody be agitated about. And that's not unusual. They might be talking about the start times of the meetings or whatever it might be. You'll find that there are common issues. Identify those and then take appropriate action to get rid of them. So in some cases, it might be just to train the issues out. If you've found something that is significant, you may need to plan a mitigation if it presents a risk to the organisation. And in some cases, you just agree to live with them. If it's individual stuff, you wind up with people with attitudes, you wind up with soapbox kind of people. You may never turn that ship around. So it's like a pebble in the shoe. You learn to walk. You learn to walk with it over time if it stays there, and you just make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. But overall, you can use the input to inform the change, and that happens first at individual level. You can absolutely suggest it. There's nothing wrong with having a round evaluation and sharing opinions, and they can be quite strong. But the bottom line is that you have to keep the purpose of the organization and the mission in sight. One of the things I suppose I should have said about directors earlier on is that when you get a mix of them, there's a skills matrix and a skill set that's increasingly coming into boards. So you'll have people from IT, you'll have people from finance, you might have people from HR, and they're arriving on the boards as a result of a skills matrix, inviting and going out with your nominations committee or nominations process to find people with certain skills. But it's important that they gel together, and that while they come with a skill and they may have been nominated because of the skill, they are also part of the totality. And in some cases, in an assessment, it's important to remind the specific skills people that they are part of the bigger and are expected, and it is useful for them to contribute. The individual questions is the usual way, should we say, if you're going to do this. Consolidated reports, obviously anonymize the consolidation, because you're talking about, yeah, we found that everybody doesn't like the meeting room, or we need to do whatever it is that you've learned from it. They might decide that they want to see fewer or better materials, whatever it might be. If they're anonymized and you get an agreement that if you've, say, 5 inputs and 4 of them have a particular issue, that's what you're looking for, and that's using the data. And obviously, you focus on the key issues you find, and the revisit is revisiting with an individual that purpose is important and useful, and you may need to do a course correction. And that can happen by the individual simply answering the question himself, or by bringing it to the attention of the individual in the process. But if there are significant issues, you're going to find conflicts. There's statistics out there about boardrooms. Really, it doesn't take long to find where trust has broken down at board level in organizations, and it happens in the largest organizations down to the smallest organizations. And we can't be naive about the reality of it. It does happen. People are people. Humans are flawed, and yes, you'll get variance of opinion, and sometimes it can manifest itself in the destruction of the purpose. And that is where the chair, the senior management, that have to say, stop. We can't let this continue. get a hold of it, or it'll go out of control. And if it goes out of control, then you're back to the responsibility layer, and somebody else may take control of the organization and say, hey, listen, guys, you're out of here, you can't run this. From our perspective, we asked lots of questions, and I would take this question set, and in fairness, I would give credit to Sport Wales for a lot of it. They produced a very good document on behaviour and attitudes, and this is typical behaviour and attitude set of questions. And here you've got anonymised, the anonymised top. So 7 inputs were expected here, 5 of them arrived. And where there's a question with a no answer, then you've got one of the directors is concerned about that. But then when you have two together, can you confirm you don't ever get inflexibly caught up in promoting your own views? And 2 of them say no, they can't confirm that. Then you know that it's an issue that you need to address in the collective review. I'm conscious of time here. This is typical. I'm back here to using data. So this is a board self-assessment matrix as a collective, and you can see these are the issues. It's just a report of the issues that have no answers, and the no answer is where an expected control, like promoting your own views, and somebody has admitted that they do. And I'm looking at another one here. Say, are you a champion for diversity on the board? And you've got a no. This kind of thing. These reports can give you a communication. Data, communicating with the data that is anonymized raises focus on the issue. And once you've got focus on the issue, you begin to go into resolve mode. And most of these behaviour and attitude things would be based off the fiduciary responsibilities and duties we talked about earlier on. Always fun to know how effective is the board. So just putting down some of the things that you'd like the people to say. Our meetings are challenging, but not fractious. We have a good mix of relevant skills. We are achieving the purpose or objective of the organization. Our strategic plan is being successfully implemented. I shouldn't just simply be reading these out, but you get it yourself. Meetings, we are meeting all compliance obligations. So that's the regulatory piece. So those 2 black boxes, the top end, the legal and regulatory piece, and then down the bottom, we're obeying our own rules. And that's not always the case. But if you could say that coming away from a board evaluation, you'd be in fairly good shape. I know that's Valhalla, but in reality, yeah, that's what you should be looking for. Now, I'm done. I think I'm more or less on time. I said about 35 minutes, and there you go. So I go to questions and answers if we've got questions. Fiona, have we questions?
Not at the moment. There were a couple of thank yous and apologies for people who have to leave early, but no open questions at the minute.
No questions. Okay. Well, that's either a good thing or bad thing.
Some more thanks coming in there, Paul. So
Okay. All right. Well, if anybody's got a question now, do bear in mind we will share these with we share this data with everybody as usual, and the recording is available as well. So I hope you found it useful.
oh, there we have some questions popping through now. If you've
Okay, yeah, great.
okay, so how often somebody's asking how often should we carry out this activity?
Typically, it's an annual thing. Now, obviously, it depends a little bit on the board. 2 things happen here. If you've got a board of, let's say you've got a board of 9 people, you'll get some rotation. So depending on how that works, you might have a member who's only been there, who's never had a review because they're fairly new. So an annual thing is fine. You're expecting that there'll be some churn on the board as you go through the process as well. So in order to catch everybody in the process and let them feel involved in the process, I would say annually is very good. And that's recommended in some of the standards and some of the codes of practice as well.
Okay, and another question. Would you consider developing a template for credit union board assessments?
Yeah, actually, probably what I would do, I'm thinking I might talk to Sandy about that, but certainly, yeah, Sandy, I would talk to Sandy about it. Templates are strange. Though in fairness, you talk about credit unions, generally their purpose is the same, the mission and purpose is the same, their stakeholders, the members are the same, and they have all these rules and regulations. So, I would say yes is the answer. You talk to Sandy, and we'll take it as an action from here.
Great. Somebody else is asking, can you make the skills matrix available?
The skills matrix.
That's something that have to be generated.
Yeah. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we'll put that down. Put that down as well as a to do. We might put it in as an additional slide here, what a typical skills matrix looks like.
Yeah.
One of the things about that is you might look for certain skills, but you'll find people out there who have a balance, who have a life experience. And I think most people tend to look for the IT people. They want to know somebody who can listen and talk to anybody, the executive, and they talk about bits and bytes. They like to have somebody on the board who do that, and usually the financial one. But write down a hard matrix, keep some generalists on it. But we do it, and we put in the matrix, we'll put in generalists, multiple generalists. So yeah, okay, we'll do that. You taking these notes that my promises that you
I
have?
am. I'm holding you to them. Yeah.
Okay.
So Jenny says, difficult to do a board assessment when it's a startup. Do you have any experience in the startup sector? Oh, surprise, surprise. Yes, you do.
Well, having been in startups, yes, it is difficult to do board assessments in a startup, because you've got the entrepreneurs and the boards will tend to be small. There's a couple of things that you can do. I mean, when your question is that you're thinking you would do it yourself, I'm assuming. But there's a whole lot of organizations out there, and depending on the nature of the startup, if, for example, you're with Enterprise Ireland, it's possible to get in connection with some of the people who would be able to do that evaluation for you, with you in startup, when you're in startup mode, people who understand in detail the kind of tensions that go on in startups. And there are some very skilled advisors out there who would help you with that. If you're the entrepreneur is passionate in one direction is the usual thing, and they won't stop to do this evaluation, carry on. Possibly part of a strategic plan cycle is the time and place to do it, and just get the guys away for a day and say, hey, listen, we need to look at where we're going here, and we need to look how we interact, and we need to do and put some of those things on an agenda.
Okay. There's another couple of questions if you've got time, Paul. So
yeah.
What to do? So this person is a member of the executive and the chair doesn't seem interested in doing a board review. So any advice for that person?
Depends on the sector. Yeah, it is an issue, and yeah, sometimes people feel uneasy about doing these. But I think the first thing you do is say, look, we have to do this because this is both good practice, it's best practice, and we have to find an opportunity to do the feedback. And if the chair is reluctant, again, if you want to reach for somebody outside, talk them into doing that. you just don't know the personality of the individuals involved. They just may be uncomfortable doing that kind of thing. And to be honest, if you don't have an honest conversation, the chair doesn't have an honest conversation with the directors, warts and all kind of conversation. And the thing is more as congratulatory and almost meaningless. So I've got a phone going on here in the background. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, a tough one. Probably walk in the park. Yeah, I think it's important to do it, and if you can point out the importance of it. If you want to take a look, if don't know the industry, don't know the regulatory environment, but if you look at any of the regulations or codes, they all suggest that, more than suggest, that a board review take place. You might bring that to his attention or her attention in order to trigger it.
Okay, so going back to the startup question, Jenny, is a follow-up question. What committees would you recommend for a fintech startup? So a risk oversight committee feels too much, but so does covering all governance and risk and compliance within a regular board meeting.
Fintech, risk, risk and compliance, or audit and risk is not unusual. Most fintechs would be in there. There's an awful lot of procedures in it. And there's an awful lot of rules and regs around. So yeah, having somebody to help that. Now, one of the things about the board committee is the board committee, the directors work with the executive. So I would say in a startup, in a fintech, you should have mixed committees, executive and director. And what happens is the relationships form, the directors better understand what the executive are doing, and they can bring that to the board. And on the other hand, an experienced director or directors will be very useful to the executives. But the single biggest issue that happens there is relationships form and understanding happens. And conversations from that understanding turns into we will work together for the betterment of the total organization. No, I'm saying not conspire together, work together for the betterment of the organization. So yeah, I'm only afraid of committees. Risk and audit is probably, or audit and risk, they're often called. And as a result, I mean, one of the big risks is the compliance failure. So you'll find that the compliance piece is sucked into that. Hope that's useful.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And then, yeah, Jenny just confirmed that they cover all risk and compliance in a board meeting rather than a risk oversight committee.
Take it out of a board meeting. A good, strong director or two directors who are on a committee, and don't make a committee sessions too long. Have them organized maybe an hour before a board meeting, something like that, where they can go and do that. Let the directors carry it in. Far shorter, far less grueling on the executive. If you're dealing with 2 people or 3 people that you know and have fond relationships with, it's far easier to bring that in. For the directors to bring that in. If a director given assurance to listen, we've been through the audit committee and this is solid, or these are the things that we need to be focused on in the next 12 months or next 6 months, or the startup might be in the next week. So yeah, keep it out of the board. Keep the detail out of the board if you can.
Great. And then just want to confirm that the slides will be going out.
Yes.
So a few people have asked, but one person's also asking, could we point them in the direction of the questions that you credited to Sport Wales? So we'll do that too.
Yeah, we got them, probably got them. Well, we put them into calQrisk, into the software. And like they're slightly modified, but certainly I'll send you details of the document. So yeah, I'll send you details.
They're on the web. It's on the Sport Wales website.
Sport Wales website. Yeah. What they did was they broke the things down into behaviour, and there's a lot of questions in it. There's a lot of questions in it. But what they were trying to do is a set of guidance. We use them. What they were was they're questions, they're common sense questions that were brought together. And it was the most, in my view, was the most comprehensive set of brought together questions that I've seen. And that's why we added and modified them slightly, but yeah, but certainly a link.
And I think that's it. Lots of thanks coming in again. So we'll leave it there. And
Great. I hope it was useful, and if we can do anything for you, give us a call. And I've enjoyed preparing for it, and thank you very much for your time and interest. It's great to meet you all.